left hand, I have a feather. In my right hand, a hammer. And I'll drop the two of them here, and hopefully they'll hit the ground at the same time. How about that?
Superb.
This is Kennedy Launch Control. We're at T-minus 56 minutes and counting. All still going well with the countdown at this time. Coming up in just about 3 minutes, that Apollo access arm, the arm that the astronauts used to go across to board their spacecraft, will be retracted to a standby position. It's retracted 12 degrees or some 6 feet from the spacecraft. Once this does occur, we arm that launch escape system, the launch escape tower on top of the spacecraft, and from that point down in the countdown, if there was any critical emergency situation, an abort could take place right on the launch pad with the solid fuel motors in the launch escape tower, which generates some 155,000 pounds of thrust, pulling the spacecraft away from a launch vehicle that would be in trouble and an explosion imminent. This is one of the number of emergency conditions that we do plan for and do have systems to handle here in the last hour or so of the countdown. All aspects of the count still going well. We're at 54 minutes, 45 seconds and counting. This is Kennedy Launch Control. This is Kennedy Launch Control. Swing arm is now moving back from the spacecraft on command right at the 53-minute mark. It'll be moved some 6 feet away from the spacecraft and remain in that standby condition for contingency purposes through the remainder of the countdown until at 5 minutes it is fully retracted. The astronauts, of course, were alerted that this event would occur because they do feel a slight jolt as the swing arm and the white room attached to its tip is pulled away. The astronauts still continuing their final checks aboard the spacecraft, and the crew here in firing room 1 at the Launch Control Center here at Complex 39 still monitoring the status of the propellants on board the vehicle. We loaded more than 750,000 gallons of liquid oxygen, liquid hydrogen aboard the Saturn V this morning from the time the countdown picked up late last evening. A power transfer test, one of our key tests over the last hour or so in the countdown, has been successfully accomplished here in the firing room. We have switched from external power to the internal batteries on board the 3 stages and instrument unit of the Saturn V to assure that they are operating properly. To conserve those batteries on board, we've now returned to external power. We will finally switch internal with the rocket at the 50-second mark in the count. The countdown has been going very well. In fact, we're about 10 minutes ahead on events both concerned with the spacecraft and the launch vehicle. We're now 51 minutes, 25 seconds and counting. This is Kennedy Launch Control. This is Kennedy Launch Control, T-minus 46 minutes and counting. T-minus 46 minutes and counting. We are proceeding satisfactorily, aiming toward our planned liftoff here for Apollo 15. The Apollo 15 astronauts crew standing by on the spacecraft at this time. They'll have quite a bit more work before we reach our T0, but they're standing by at this point. They've completed their guidance and alignment checks and are waiting as certain key launch vehicle checks are taking place at this time. We have just completed a check of the Digital Range Safety Command Destruct System. These are the destruct packages aboard the 3 stages of the Saturn V that would be activated if the vehicle was flying off course and was a danger to personnel below. Of course, before the destruct system would be activated, the abort sequence would take place and the astronaut crew and their spacecraft would be separated from the launch vehicle. Our weather is go and all aspects of the countdown go. 44 minutes, 57 seconds and counting. This is Kennedy Launch Control. This is Kennedy Launch Control at T-minus 40 minutes, 54 seconds and counting. Still proceeding very well at this time, aiming toward our planned T0 at 9:34 a.m. The astronauts will be busy again shortly in the spacecraft, particularly Command Module pilot Al Worden as he proceeds to go through the sequence of pressurizing the reaction control system of the spacecraft. This is primarily concerned with those 4 quadrants of 100-pound thrust rockets on the side of the service module. We pressurized that system before launch, and Al Worden reads off the status of the overall system so that spacecraft test conductor Skip Chauvin and the crew back in the spacecraft control center can determine that that system is go for launch. Of course, the reaction control system used extensively on the flight to and from the moon for small refinements on trajectory. Here in firing room 1, we'll go for the final portion of the count. We have a clearance from the range to launch, and our countdown is continuing. The countdown has been going excellently since it picked up at 11:34 p.m. last evening following a 9-hour, 34-minute built-in hold. Since that time, a major portion of the count was devoted to the propellant loading of the Saturn V launch vehicle, bringing aboard liquid oxygen and liquid hydrogen, the so-called cryogenic propellant, aboard the 3 stages of the vehicle. We loaded more than 750,000 gallons of the oxygen and hydrogen on board, and at liftoff, we expect to have a vehicle weighing close to 6.5 million pounds on the launch pad. The Saturn V space vehicle stands some 363 feet. As far as the Apollo 15 crew is concerned, the crew was awakened by their boss, Donald K. Slayton, as planned in the countdown at 4:19 a.m. Eastern Daylight Time. They were given a brief physical exam by Dr. Jack Keegan a short time later, and he declared them in excellent physical condition and very well rested. The crew then sat down to breakfast with a number of the astronaut members of the backup team and support team who have worked so hard with them in preparation for the mission, and then were ready to proceed to the suit laboratory to don their pressure suits and go through final checks prior to being ready to go to the launch pad. Once again, as planned in the countdown, they departed the crew quarters at 6:28 a.m. Eastern Daylight Time, arrived at the pad about 18 minutes later, and then went on board the spacecraft at about the 2.5-hour mark in the count. Since that time, Scott, Worden, and Irwin have been performing various checks, working with the spacecraft control team, and all these checks have gone well. Our status is excellent at this time. The weather forecast is certainly a go for launch with clear skies or clear to scattered skies. The surface winds about 10 miles per hour from the south, and the weather situation on the worldwide track as far as contingency purposes all go. That's our status, T-minus 37 minutes, 35 seconds and counting. This is Kennedy Launch Control. Kennedy Launch Control, T-minus 26 minutes and counting. We're still proceeding very satisfactorily here in the final minutes of the countdown, all still going well. The busy activity right now, astronaut Al Worden giving final verification of the status of the propellant system on board the Apollo spacecraft. He's working with spacecraft test conductor Skip Chauvin, giving the key readings on the various systems, temperatures, and pressures to assure that that reaction control system is go for the launch. It will have a lot of work to do during the mission, and we want to make sure that it is precisely right before we're ready to commit to launch. Skip Chauvin now informs the astronauts that we're still about 10 minutes ahead in the countdown, and Dave Scott replies back with a rather quick roger. The countdown's still going. Launch vehicle status is go. 25 minutes, 2 seconds and counting. This is Kennedy Launch Control. This is Kennedy Launch Control. T-minus 20 minutes, 56 seconds, and counting. All aspects of the count still go, still aiming toward our planned T0 at the appointed time of 9:34 a.m. Astronaut Al Worden, the command module pilot in the middle seat, has completed his checks of the pressurization system for the reaction controls of the Apollo spacecraft, and all is still going well. Here in the Launch Control Center, the crew has started a sequence to chill down the upper two stages of the Saturn V because of the extremely low temperatures of the liquid oxygen and liquid hydrogen involved in the propellant system, and it is necessary to condition the engine chambers in both the second and third stages so that they will be at a lower temperature when the propellants are introduced at ignition time during the powered phase of the flight. We'll have more than 11 minutes of powered flight in the first phase of the mission before the spacecraft, the Apollo spacecraft, is placed into a parking orbit some 90 nautical miles high, still attached to the third stage. A second burn of that third stage will place the This is Kennedy Launch Control. 16-minute mark has just been passed. We're at 15 minutes, 53 seconds and counting. The astronaut crew standing by for some important functions that will be coming up in a minute or so as the Apollo spacecraft goes on full internal power on the fuel cells on board. Up to this time in the countdown, an external power source also has been applied to conserve those fuel cells. The external power source is removed. The astronauts will take a look at the status of their power system on board and report it back to the spacecraft control center. Both the astronauts also will arm their hand controllers on board the spacecraft, and we will be ready to proceed to also place the emergency detection system on its automatic mode. Our countdown is still proceeding very satisfactorily as we come up on the 15-minute mark. The flight azimuth is the same. About 5 minutes ago, there was an update given to the spacecraft computer. No changes were required because our countdown is right on time. 14 minutes, 53 seconds and counting. This is Kennedy Launch Control. This is Kennedy Launch Control, T-minus 10 minutes, 55 seconds and counting. Countdown still running smoothly as astronaut Dave Scott on board the spacecraft checks out a key abort circuit. This is a special communication system with only about 3 or 4 people on it. These are the people who could recommend an abort to the spacecraft commander if required. These people include the launch operations manager, Paul Donnelly, the spacecraft communicator here in the control center, astronaut Vance Brand, spacecraft test conductor Skip Chauvin, and Houston flight director Jerry Griffin. We've checked out this special communication system, and Dave Scott confirms that all is well. The countdown proceeding. Jim Irwin now reading off some checks on the status of the fuel cells as we continue to go. We'll go on an automatic sequence here in the countdown, starting at the 3-minute, 7-second mark in the count. From that time down, we will be automatic with the countdown driven by the computer. This will wind up with ignition of those 5 engines in the first stage at the 8.9-second mark in the countdown. The engines will build up to their full thrust. The computer will make a determination that we have 90% thrust in all 5 engines, and that will be the signal for commit or to release the vehicle. Our countdown is still proceeding, 9 minutes, 33 seconds and counting. This is Kennedy Launch Control.
This is Kennedy Launch Control, T-minus 5 minutes, 55 seconds and counting. We're still go. We're about to come up with some status checks now to determine the final status. In the meantime, the lunar module test conductor, Fritz Weideck, has come in over the circuit and informed the spacecraft commander, Dave Scott, that lunar module Falcon and the rover are go. Dave Scott thanked him for this, and then also received a report from spacecraft test conductor Skip Chauvin that the command ship, which will have the call sign Endeavour, also is go. We've just completed our status reports, and the launch operations manager, Paul Donnelly, the launch director, Walt Caprian, and the mission director, Chet Lee, all have given their goes. We're standing by for the swing arm to retract to its full fallback position. It's moving now as we approach the 5-minute mark in the count. Coming up on the 5-minute mark. Mark, T-minus 5 minutes and counting. We're go on Apollo 15. This is Kennedy Launch Control. This is Kennedy Launch Control. We've just passed the 3-minute, 30-second mark in the count. The terminal sequencer has been armed, and we are go. Launch operations manager Paul Donnelly just wished the crew good luck and Godspeed, and received an expression of thanks from all 3 crew members. We'll be coming up shortly on the automatic sequence. 3 minutes, 10 seconds. Firing command enable. Firing command on. We have the firing command. We're now on the automatic sequence, and the tanks in the 3 stages of the Saturn V that contain those propellants will begin to pressurize. The countdown is still proceeding, and we're at now 2 minutes, 50 seconds and counting. We understand there is an estimate that there are more than 1 million people in the area here to view the launch. The traffic has been heavy since 2 o'clock this morning. The beaches are packed and the roads are packed. 2 minutes, 35 seconds and counting. We're monitoring our status board here in firing room 1. Our ready lights are on, concerned with spacecraft, emergency detection system, instrument unit. Our preparations are complete, and the automatic sequence is continuing. 2 minutes, 20 seconds and counting. We now have 2nd stage liquid oxygen and 3rd stage liquid oxygen supplies pressurized as the countdown continues. Coming up on the 2-minute mark, we'll be standing by for the cue ball cover to be retracted shortly atop the Saturn V vehicle. Mark, T-minus 2 minutes and counting, still going well. Propellant stable on board the vehicle. The crew here in the firing room monitoring more than 300 red line values, watching temperatures and pressures to ensure they do not go above nominal. In the case that it did, any one of these key people could call in to hold the countdown. 1 minute, 36 seconds and counting, still going well. The pressurization sequence is still continuing in the vehicle. We're now 90 seconds away from liftoff, all still going well. We'll go on internal power with the vehicle at the 50-second mark in the count. We now get indications from our status board that all is still going well, and the 3rd stage is now completely pressurized. Coming up shortly on the 1-minute mark, we're now 70 seconds and counting. 2nd stage tanks are pressurized as our countdown continues. Mark, T-minus 60 seconds and counting on Apollo 15. The astronauts are go, launch vehicle and spacecraft components all go as our countdown proceeds. Now 50 seconds, we have the power transfer. The vehicle now on the battery power on the vehicle, and all is still going well. Lunar Module pilot Jim Irwin making some final checks, now passing the 40-second mark. Spacecraft Commander Dave Scott now has made his final check. That is aligning the guidance system. 30 seconds and counting. The guidance system will go internal at the 17-second mark. Now 25 seconds. We have complete clearance to launch. We are go. 20. 15 seconds, guidance internal, 13, 12, 11, 10, 9, 8, ignition sequence start, engines armed, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, all engines running, launch commit, liftoff, we have liftoff at 9:34 a.m. Eastern Daylight Time. The tower is clear.
And we have a roll program.
Roger. You have good thrust on all 5 engines.
Thanks, Gordo. Roll complete.
Roger.
And we have a pitch program.
Roger. Stand by for mode 1 Bravo. Mark 1 Bravo.
Roger, 1 Bravo.
Booster Systems engineer reports to flight director that S1C stage looking good.
Houston, everything looks perfect down here.
Okay, let's move up here, Gordo.
Going through maximum dynamic pressure at this time.
Charlie. Mark.
Each of the S1Cs.
Roger.
Each of the 5 S1C engines gulping 3 tons of fuel per second.
Inboard.
Roger, inboard.
Flight dynamics reports go for staging.
Good stage.
Roger. Houston, you have good thrust on the S2. All 5 are good.
Okay.
.73 miles downrange, 47.9 altitude.
747.
Roger.
Fire jet.
Roger, we confirm the skirt set. You're mode 2.
Roger, mode 2. Guidance initiate.
Roger.
I'm coming up on 10,000 feet per second mark, downrange 131, altitude 66.
15 Houston at 4. The guidance has converged. The CMC is go. Everything looks good.
Okay, go. Let's get up here.
Now at 35% of the velocity needed to orbit. Downrange 190 miles, altitude 79.
Houston, 5 minutes. Everything looks nominal. Your go.
Okay, go. Thank you. Let's get up here.
40% of velocity needed.
Roger.
Downrange 271, altitude 88. Predicting nominal shutdown on the S2 stage.
Houston, times are nominal. Level sense arm will be 8 plus 3, 4. And S2 cutoff at 9er plus 0, 9er. Over.
Roger, 8 plus 3, 4, and 9 plus 0, 9.
And stand by for S4B to COI. Mark, you have S4B to COI now.
Roger, S4B to COI.
380 miles, downrange, altitude 94.5. Velocity 15,000 feet per second.
Stand by for S4B to orbit capability. Mark, you have it now.
Roger, S4B to orbit.
Downrange 479, altitude 96. Now approaching 65% of velocity needed for orbit. Velocity now 16,700 feet per second. Official time of liftoff 34 minutes, 00 seconds, .79.
Inboard.
Roger, inboard.
Right.
Downrange 660 miles, altitude 95 miles. 78% velocity required for orbit.
15 Houston. 15 Houston. Go ahead. Say again, 15.
Houston 15, we didn't call. You got something?
You've had PU shift and the thrust looks good.
Okay.
You've had level sense arm now.
Roger.
About 6 seconds to staging.
Stand by for mode 4 capability. Mark, you have mode 4 now.
Roger, in a good stage.
Roger.
Booster reports thrust okay on the S4B stage.
You have a good thrust on the S4B.
Roger.
.960 miles downrange, 94.7 altitude, velocity 23,230.
Houston, everything's looking perfect. Predicted cutoff time 11 plus 37. Over.
Roger, 11 plus 37.
Miles downrange, 93.4 altitude, 97% of velocity, 98% of velocity required, 25,143 feet per second.
Okay, cutoff, 11 plus 34.
Roger.
Booster confirms the S4B has shut down.
Okay, Houston, gamma motors are off, and the S4B oxidizer is 40, and the fuel is about 3-1.
Roger, 40 and 3-1.
Okay, Gordo, we got ourselves in a 93.7 by 88.9. Shut down on a VI of plus 25595. H dot plus 00008. Altitude plus 00932.
Roger, out, copy.
Houston, that's beautiful. This has got to be one of the most proud moments of my life, I guarantee you.